Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Furman, and I'm a Shuzo with the Dragonfly Sangha. And Sensei Tony asked me to share a few words with you all this evening. And when he did so, I was a little nervous, never having given a Dharma talk before, but was really excited for the chance. And so I hope that some of you will find this message useful. So what I wanted to talk to you about was some things that I've found have made my Buddhist practice a bit more meaningful for me. And, like a lot of folks who come to Buddhism in the West, particularly those of us who enter the priesthood, but I really think anyone who embraces this path, oftentimes we find this is not our first spiritual tradition. For me, I was raised in the United Methodist Church. I was brought up with my family with a nearby church, and was very active growing up. From a very young age, I was very spiritually curious, and I always would seek answers to those big whys, and I started studying for the ministry and for ordination in the United Methodist Church when I was around 14 or 15 years old. And I'm sure to some of my friends, like a lot of religious teenagers, I was probably pretty insufferable at times. But it was something that I took very seriously. And certainly my spirituality continued to develop and evolve as I studied for ordination. And I went to college, my undergrad, to study religion and philosophy, with the intention of eventually getting my Master's of Divinity and being ordained in the United Methodist Church. But obviously, here I am in a Buddhist community, wearing Buddhist robes. So clearly things did not go quite as planned, as they rarely do. But certainly I feel it worked out for the better for me personally. But for those of us, and certainly for me, but when you leave behind a spiritual tradition, there's a lot of things that you leave behind that you don't take with you. So, for instance, the scripture. And so I was no longer reading the Bible, but certainly there was a lot of Buddhist literature and Buddhist scripture that I found very meaningful to me. The community, the church family, it was kind of that was a tougher break to make, honestly, because I was very active in the church. A lot of people didn't understand when I left, and so that was really hard. And of course, just the practices, the rituals and the routines of the church. So Sunday mornings or Wednesday evenings, or different religious holidays throughout the year, personal practices that I developed over time that were useful to me in the church. And because that break from my old religion wasn't very clean, particularly when it came to the community, because like I said, I was really active in the church. I think people just didn't understand why this change was happening. For them, it seemed very sudden. For me, it was something that had taken quite a few years, a very slow process. But I don't think they understood it. So from their perspective, it looked like I was abandoning my faith, that I was, being very heretical, that I was an apostate, right? And because, I for me, like I said, it felt great. I wanted them to be happy for me, but of course I couldn't really expect them to be happy for me. I was leaving the flock. But because of that tension there, I developed a bit of resentment. Particularly around those old forms and those old rituals. And so I felt really free after that. Sunday mornings were no longer for church. My church now was the blue sky and the grass and the trees and the rocks and the mountains and everything like that. It was very liberating. And I embraced this newfound freedom because it was a mark of my new religious path. But there was a spiritual ember inside me that really needed nurturing, right? Because this was a new venture for me. I'd been in the church since I was a child. And so this was something now that I was doing that was new. So a lot of the stoking of the flames really was intellectual for me. So a lot of reading, a lot of reflecting and thinking and journaling. I would seek out websites, movies, artwork, and my house, certainly my surroundings reflected these changes. No longer did I have pictures of Jesus or crosses, but instead I had, incense and statues of the Buddha or bodhisattvas. Um, and I liked it. I liked that my environment reflected this change and that there was an outward expression of this inward spiritual path. And I sought out a religious community or a spiritual community. I found the Dragonfly Sangha many years ago now and got involved. And it was great. I loved being around like minded people. But, when I would go there for, say, Oban or Hanamatsuri for some of our liturgical celebrations, there was a bit of discomfort there because here's a group of people engaged in ritual and liturgy, and I had put that stuff behind. It all reminded me of my old spiritual path, of my time in the church. And so there was kind of this nascent distrust there. Um, but again, that ember needed stoking, and so I continued to read, I continued to study and to learn where I could. And about 3 years ago, I made the decision to sort of formalize that training and entered seminary here with the Sangha. And I'd spoken to Sensei several times in the years leading up to that point, and a joke with them, an analogy around people who have this calling. Because again, I was called to ministry in the church, felt that ongoing call as a Buddhist, and I said, boy, when you feel that calling, when you're someone who is spiritually involved, you're kind of screwed because you can't really escape that. You're sort of like the coin, spinning in those big donation bowls they would have in shopping malls, right? Where you put the quarter and it spins around the bowl and spins, and then finally it drops down into the middle. And I said, you know what? I'm really spinning, and one of these days I'm going to drop. And then finally, about 2.5, 3 years ago, I dropped and I joined seminary. And like any serious learning or any serious study, especially spiritual study, you unlearn as much as you learn, right? You undo some of that hardening, that spiritual ossification that happens within you, where you think I'm sure about this thing. I know this to be true. And as a Buddhist, we love lists. So, you memorize all of these facts, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Five Skandhas and the three Dharma seals and all of these things, right? But that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to study, is because I wanted to be challenged. I wanted someone to help me prove out these things I was learning. But liturgy remained tricky for me. And even as a priest, I certainly came to love the liturgies with my fellow clergy and with everyone in the community. I loved my vestments, my robe, my raksu, my kesa here. It was very meaningful to me. But at home, when I got home from the house of meditation, my practice still remained very intellectual, more reading, more writing, reflecting, collecting of things. And even now, over the last year, almost a year that we've been doing all of our liturgical celebrations and these Monday evening meditations remotely, there were times where I would just sort of participate very passively. I would just kind of watch. And there would be times, if I was near my centering space, that I would also light incense. But again, it was sort of a very passive, non-participative experience. And here's the thing: I live by myself. I've lived by myself for close to 14 years now, and so I don't have to worry about bothering anyone, with chanting or with incense. I don't have to feel self-conscious, or worry about anyone watching me. And certainly those of you who also live by yourself, or if you have a moment where a spouse or your partner is out of the house and you're just kind of by yourself. You don't normally walk around talking to yourself, apart from the occasional, where did I leave my keys or something like that. So I don't know if I felt funny about bowing or chanting on my own, but I just didn't always do it. Whether it was watching the Monday evening meditation or just in my normal practice. But I came to realize, especially over the last 2 years, that to really stoke that spiritual ember inside me, to really connect with my Buddha nature, and to really nurture a practice and go beyond just thought and study, that I needed some kind of structure. I needed some kind of formal movement in my practice. And so I started to light incense every day. Like I said, I had a centering space. There was no excuse to not do so. But I set up a smaller centering space just in my kitchen, right next to my sink, very much a part of my everyday, and would light incense. Just very simple, not the full opening of the space that you'll see us do, but really just, bowing to the centering space, lighting a candle and ringing a bell to sort of signal my own openness and awareness. I would light a stick of incense, make our 3 circles, touch it to my forehead, place it in the sand, bow, and then ring the bell and blow out the candle. It's a very simple thing. But when I did that, it really made me realize that this is not just a mental exercise, that Buddhist practice is not something that you can just only do up here. And I realized that I was involving myself in practices that were thousands of years old. Something as simple as lighting incense is something that Buddhists have been doing for a long, long time. And realizations really came to me. The first one was that finally my whole self was involved in a practice. Not just my mind, but my ears, the ringing of the bell, my eyes, my hands, my nose, smelling the incense, my back from bowing, right? All of my senses were brought to attention with this simple act. And also, I realized very quickly that even though I was home by myself, I wasn't practicing alone. I was participating in liturgical movements with everyone who ever had or ever will. And I'm keeping these practices alive with my own expression of them. And of course, in the Dragonfly Sangha, we have the Book of Common Meditation, which I think is beautiful. It contains all of our liturgies, certainly several daily liturgies that can be practiced, but also for our major liturgical celebrations throughout the year, for big life events, so for births or deaths, and then gathas that you can recite for certain situations. And I started to make use of it. Not just for the liturgy of the day, but there have been times where if something happens, I over the last year, two people in my extended circle have passed away, and in both cases, I felt like I needed to do something to acknowledge that, to light incense for those people. And before, while I may have reflected on their passings in a very what I would consider to be Buddhist terms. So, for instance, they crossed over to the other shore. Their form had changed. That things are very impermanent. But by involving more of myself in that recognition, I realized that I was sharing in the grief of those who missed them, and I was able to be with those people and be really connected to them, to the people both who had passed on and also to the people who were left behind. And I was doing so in a way that had been done by millions of people over thousands of years. And as I continue my training and prepare for my own ordination in our tradition, I've become much more intentional with following these liturgies, and not just with the community in a shared way, but on my own. And I've been taking part in the liturgy of the day at home at my own centering space. Um, and again, my rituals are still fairly quiet. There's not a lot of bombast or anything like that. The ringing of the bell, the bowing, the lighting of incense. But as I read through the liturgy of the day, I move my hands. You see, I'm very expressive. Move my hands. I put my hands out. I put my hands up. I put my hands together as I read different sentences and different parts of our liturgy, and I felt really connected to these movements because again, it wasn't just something that was only in my head. It was involving my entire body, and what my body was doing synced up with what all the other senses were experiencing. And it deepened my practice substantially. And now I would have considered myself to have been a Buddhist for the last, say, 19, 20 years, almost half of my life. But only now do I feel like I have a practice, right? And the practice is different for everyone. And I know for me, I've always, thought practice needed to look a certain way. I always thought it meant, well, I need to sit in meditation for 30 minutes a day. And maybe for you, sitting meditation is a very important part of your practice, as it is for many, many in our tradition, or walking meditation, or like Sensei Tony mentioned last week, generous giving, dana, is an incredibly important practice. But people will do things that they find meaningful to them. So I would invite you, as you're watching this, as you watch these Monday evening meditations, that you participate. Chant, bow, move your body, light incense. Be a part of these rituals. Because again, I've certainly been in the situation where I watch very, very passively, where I'm not, participating along with everyone else. But give it a shot. And as you try it, as you do things like light the incense, or you ring a bell, or you bow, or put your hands in different places as you go through the liturgy of the day, notice what's happening in your mind and in your body. Pay attention to what changes. Because what you'll realize is, again, that you're not doing these practices by yourself. You're not alone when you're participating in these liturgies, because you're doing it with all of us. You're doing it with me. You're doing it with Sensei Tony, with all of the other priests in our community. You're doing it with all Buddhists around the world who have ever existed, and really who will exist anytime in the future, who practice in this way, with the Buddha himself. And maybe you're like me, and you've left behind another spiritual tradition, and you have some suspicion of ritual, and you're a little nervous about what those things mean and what they are. But try it. See what happens. And so that's what I wanted to share with you this evening. And I hope that these words are useful to you, that you may find something in them that you can practice for yourself. And until I speak to you all again, thank you very much.